Good morning, everybody. I'm pleased to say that again overnight there was no community transmission in New South Wales, which is extremely pleasing. We do have 4 cases in hotel quarantine, but again I want to thank the community for coming forward and getting tested, for doing all the right things, for maintaining good social distancing and making sure New South Wales continues to be on the track we're at. I'm also very pleased to confirm today that a number of restrictions will be eased. In fact, my colleagues and I, in conjunction with the health experts, were able to go a bit further than what we anticipated this morning, which is fantastic news. So it means that if you're hosting an event at your home, you can have up to 50 people so long as you utilise an outdoor space. If you don't have an outdoor space, we don't recommend any more than 30 people inside the home. But if you have a backyard or an outdoor space you can utilise, you're able to have up to 50 people. Previously this was only 20, but we appreciate, given where New South Wales is at and how families and friends have been longing to be with one another, that we're able to proceed on the basis of 50, so long as you utilise an outdoor space. And 30 if you can't utilise an outdoor space is our recommendation for indoors. So if you live in a smaller premises and don't have an outdoor space, please limit your numbers to 30. We do appreciate this has a risk, and we appreciate also that at these social events in private homes, social distancing is difficult to maintain, but we ask everybody to be really COVID safe, especially if you have vulnerable people as part of your family or social gathering. Please know the virus is as contagious as ever, and we don't want those most vulnerable in particular being exposed because we're not applying common sense and doing the right thing. So in addition to having up to 50 available in your home, so long as you do use an outdoor space, we're increasing the number of outdoor gatherings to 50 if you're having a family picnic or a family barbecue or a social event or barbecue outdoors. That was previously 30, so that's also 50. We're trying to maintain consistency as far as possible across the board. In relation to hospitality venues, for venues up to 200 square metres, they can now apply the 2 square metre rule without a cap. So if you have a venue up to 200 square metres, you can apply the 2 square metre rule indoors, not the 4 square metre rule indoors. And that is something we're pleased to announce today. But I do also want to foreshadow that Health is looking very closely at being able to apply that 2 square metre rule more consistently indoors across all hospitality venues. We're not quite there yet, and Dr. Chant can comment on why that's the case. So if you're a venue up to 200 square metres, and the Deputy Premier will comment on the benefits that has, especially in regional communities, you can apply the 2 square metre rule indoors without a cap, depending on the size of your venue, obviously, in a COVID-safe way. And we feel confident in being able to move towards that with smaller venues because of the QR codes and the compulsory nature of those codes. We know that Health's able to contact trace more quickly and efficiently because the electronic record allows us to contact people as quickly as we can. And finally, in relation to restrictions today, we're pleased to say that from the 14th of December, we will be removing the health order which talks about working from home. We'll be staying silent on that. What that means is that private companies and organisations can make decisions about what they do with their employees into the new year. We want to give people time to think about this, and that's why I'm pleased to say Minister Constance is here, because removing that health order and allowing companies to consider their options also means that we need to consider what this means for our transport network and our mass transport network. And obviously, if we are going to have more people using public transport, we absolutely need to make sure more people are wearing masks. We are worried about the number of people wearing masks on public transport. We don't want to go down the mandatory path, and we are asking people to get better at wearing masks on public transport. We notice a dip when community transmission is 0 or very low. We notice people not wearing the mask, but we need you to wear that to prevent the virus spreading in case anybody with the virus is using public transport. So Minister Constance will outline the transport plans which will accompany the new health order, which essentially being removed means that hopefully businesses and other organisations can consider having more people in the workplace in a COVID-safe way. And we feel that that planning is absolutely necessary to ensure that we keep our economy moving, we keep jobs going, and that people feel more confident in 2021 about their livelihoods and their jobs than perhaps they are today in 2020. I also want to reiterate how pleased I am that the Queensland-New South Wales border will be open from the 1st of December. I think for many people who are wanting to have family reunions, but also businesses are able to keep staff on and even look to hiring staff over that period is a welcome relief, and I'm extremely pleased that that's available now to our community. So now I'll ask the Deputy Premier to make comment. Then Dr. Chant will provide some further health advice around why some of those restrictions today have been eased. Minister Constance will outline some of the plans we've put in for transport commencing from the 14th of December to ensure that businesses can have confidence that their employees will have a safe way to get to work. And then Minister Hazzard will also comment on the announcements today. In relation to the 2 square metre rule for hospitality venues, can I stress again that Health is actively considering expanding that to all venues. We're not quite there yet, and Dr. Chant will provide further information about that. Thank you, Deputy Premier.
Well, thank you, Premier. Look, today's announcement around gatherings in your home, gatherings in a public place, but more importantly, small venues, really in my mind has a regional bent to it. Of course, in regional rural New South Wales, a lot of our venues are smaller, so when you have a 200 square metre area where you are now allowed 1 per 2 square metres, it means you can have 100 people in a venue, and that is actually quite exciting for the regions. If you put that into account, that in the budget this year there was $500 million set aside to get people out and about into restaurants, hospitality and venues. That in itself will have an economic boom for the regions and for the economy in creating jobs, especially this summer. Being able again to have increased numbers at home, and we know in regional rural New South Wales our backyards are utilised more than often, and to be able to have up to 50 people because you have a backyard and you can use the backyard as part of it, because we know the risk inside is greater than having outdoor events, and bringing family together this Christmas. And I tell you what, we were robbed of a Christmas last year because of the bushfires. It does give us an opportunity to bring families together and our friends, and that is exciting as well. So today's announcements in lifting the restrictions in line with the work that the task force does, in line with the advice from Health. And can I say the advice we get from Health, there's always a level of risk, and we have to balance that against the economic uplift and of course some social benefits to the broader state. And we make these decisions in line with where the community is at, and that is the community have been able to abide by the rules and put in place those COVID safe plans if your businesses, having the QR codes, and we're encouraging more businesses to get onto the Service New South Wales QR code, because that data is important, because we never want to go backwards as a state in putting in restrictions, and that is why that data is important, and it helps our health officials and Dr. Kerry Chart's team to get it right when something goes wrong, and that's why that is important. But today, a great announcement for the state of New South Wales. For me, there is a strong sense here that this will benefit the regions greater than probably metro areas, but again, this is for all of New South Wales, and this is a good day for New South Wales.
So New South Wales recorded no new locally acquired cases in the 24 hours to 8 p.m. last night, and we recorded 4 cases in returned overseas travellers in hotel quarantine. Those testing numbers are still maintaining a good level at 16,291 tests reported to 8 p.m. last night, and also we have no patients with COVID in intensive care units. Last night we issued an alert in relation to a detection in the Liverpool sewage system, and if members of the community go onto our website, they'll find out the catchment for that detection. We're using sewage surveillance to give us that early detection and highlight areas where we might be concerned transmission is occurring undetected. And so I would call out to people in southwestern Sydney more broadly, but in the Liverpool sewage catchment area, to please come forward for testing with the most minimal of symptoms. That will really help us ahead of these opening up the community and easing restrictions to make sure that we detect any undetected disease in the community.
With the change in working from home arrangements, it means we are going to see more people returning to office spaces, particularly in CBDs. This is a very important message from the transport side of things. Please put a mask on. It's in your interests, it's in your community's interests, and your fellow commuters. It's about keeping people safe, and it's just vital, as we saw more people, particularly in the peak periods, start to return to workplaces and office spaces. I would urge everybody to be retiming their day where they can, given that at the moment 95% of services are meeting good physical distancing. As part of the step change, we will be ensuring that with the green dots, there will be a seat distance between each commuter, and of course more people will be standing in aisles as we see more people return to workplace premises. Just again, work with the frontline staff, work with our marshals. Please use your Opal data. You know, we are encouraging people to register their cards. We are encouraging people to download the app, and also as part of that, take on board the push notifications, which can indicate the loadings of a particular service in a half hour time forward, which then gives you the ability to retime if there's too many people on the network. Please avoid crowds. Take your time. Be patient, and that's the best way to get through this pandemic with public transport.
I'd like to start by thanking the people of Western Sydney who have steadfastly come forward for testing, and of course we've now seen the checking that we're doing through the sewage plants at Rouse Hill, for example, showing that we now have no transmission, or it seems like we have no transmission there at the present time. South West Sydney still remains a concern. As we heard from Dr. Chant, we have some positives coming from sewage plants in that area. So to the people of South West Sydney, I just say this: please go and get tested. We need to recognise that just one case of COVID could be a complete disaster and turn upside down all the good work that we've already all done. Can I stress that the testing, therefore, should be paramount in people's minds. If you have any symptoms at all, come forward, get tested. Together, New South Wales will keep moving forward. Obviously, this will become even more important as we move towards more relaxation of the restrictions. The 200 square metre facilities having a 2 square metre rule, one person per 2 square metre rule, will put obviously more pressure on the system. So I definitely ask people to come forward and be tested. The other thing that concerns me as Health Minister is that, as the Transport Minister has said, as we move forward to the 14th of December, my big concern is people not wearing masks in public transport. As Health Minister, I definitely do not want to be going down the path of imposing fines and making it compulsory, but it really is crucial that people stay on the journey with us. If you're going to take public transport, until we get a vaccine, there is just no way that you should be on that public transport without a mask. Wear a mask. It keeps you safe, but it keeps everybody else safe. It's critical. So I stress that. I stress it because at no stage have we wanted, and I have wanted as Health Minister, to impose fines on people, but it will become necessary if people don't lift their game in wearing masks on public transport. Thank you.
Mr. Hassel, what's the threshold for that? Because the other night when you were speaking on the T4 line, it was the first time I've seen a big crowd at some of the stations, and there were very few masks being worn. So what is the threshold where you would say...
Look, obviously we're taking health advice on that, but it is a matter for just asking people to stay with us on this journey. Public transport, we have had instances of transmission on public transport, and it's important for each and every one of us. We know if we hop on a jet now to go to Queensland or to Melbourne, we're asked to wear a mask, and people generally do. It's no different. It's just we're asking you at the moment, but in the strongest possible terms. Stay with us on the journey until we get the vaccine. Hopefully the vaccine isn't that far away. And New South Wales is doing extraordinarily well, but to everybody, wear a mask when you're on public transport. It keeps you safe and everybody else safe.
Premier, in relation to the new rules on 30 people allowed indoors, can you just clarify this? It's like changing the language of saying it's a recommendation, so it's not
That's
hard
true.
and fast, you can't go
We are appealing to people's common sense, and that is what's really, really important. So you're absolutely right. We're saying that if you don't have access to an outdoor area, if you live in a unit or you live in in a house which doesn't have access to an outdoor area, you shouldn't have more than 30 people in there. We are appealing to people's common sense. We want to keep the health orders consistent and say you can have up to 50 at your place of residence so long as you access an outdoor area with no more than 30 indoors, which is consistent with upping our public gatherings to 50. So you're absolutely right. It is a strong recommendation to maintain that 30 within a house if you don't have or a home if you don't have that outdoor premise. But the health order will say 50 you're allowed so long as you're utilising an outdoor space.
So maybe certainly for a unit, for instance, the police couldn't actually police the 30 units?
Well, we're really recommending common sense in that regard. We will consider whether we need to impose anything further in the health orders. But so far, the people of New South Wales have demonstrated in the main extreme common sense and goodwill, and we want to bring the community together and try and provide as much consistency as possible. So we are asking and appealing to people's common sense. Please do not have, for your own safety and those of your loved ones, especially if you have older people amongst you, please think about the most vulnerable. You might have someone who has low immunity, susceptible to disease, or older people. Please consider them especially, because this time of year is when multiple generations get together in the one household. We're trying to strike the balance of being as fair and understanding of people's circumstances as possible, because we know that not everybody can have a big house with a big backyard. We're trying to be as accommodating as possible while keeping people safe, and we really trust and hope the community will come with us on this. But if you do have access to an outdoor area, a large backyard or a large outdoor veranda or a large open space outdoors, up to 50 is safe, and that will be reflected in the health orders.
If this goes further than you had anticipated in increasing household gatherings to 50 with the outdoor area and removing the 50-person cap from venues up to 200 square metres, can you explain what changed between when you had decided to take these steps and announcing them today that led you to go further than you had anticipated?
No, definitely. Firstly, the health advice backed that up, and I might ask Dr. Chant to make comment on that as well. But also what is important to us is getting to a state where the health orders are far less complicated, where things are far more consistent, so long as they are consistent with the health advice. We know that every time we ease in a restriction, there is a health risk associated with that, and we have to wear that. We appreciate every time we allow the community to do a bit more, to have more people at a particular location or undertaking a particular activity, the risk does go up. But we also want to make sure we bring the community with us. We want to make sure people have a good understanding of what they can and can't do. And for that reason, given the health advice backed us in on that, we've gone for consistency as well as ensuring it's consistent with the health advice. I'll just see if Dr. Chant wants to add anything further to that.
I suppose we know that residences vary across the state. If we look at some of the people that are approaching us for exemptions, they're people that are living in rural areas, such as with big backyards, large properties, and for them the issue of why can't I actually have a safe barbecue outdoors with my extended family doesn't resonate, and it doesn't make sense from a public health risk. We'd actually prefer them to actually have that event outdoors than perhaps even in an indoor environment elsewhere. So for that purpose, we are pleading with the community to understand the distinction between the fact that we'll have 50 for indoors and outdoors, but we want a common sense. If you actually have a very small environment, please limit the numbers. We'll also be issuing some guidance which sort of gives you some tips for Christmas around staggering your guests, limiting the number and duration, making sure that if you're in an indoor environment that you use a well-ventilated space. So notwithstanding, I can't predict whether Christmas Day is going to be a very hot one or not, but if it does permit, leave your windows and doors open. We know that ventilation also reduces the risk. So we'll be issuing that advice. So the advice is 50 indoors and out, but the 50 for indoors has to be applied with 50 in residential properties has to be taking into account the nature of your residential property.
Just on small cafes and venues and the like, do they still need to seat tables 1.5 metres apart? So even if they're operating under the 1-2 rules, they can sit at 1.5 apart?
So what we've encouraged small businesses is there are some things in the orders which are mandated, which is the 1 per 2 square metres or the 1 per 4 square metres. A lot of the other things are picked up in the COVID safety plan, and the details in the COVID safety plan always have a where practical. So obviously we want to ensure that people have the 1.5 in their mind and locate the tables to use the full available space to maximise the social distancing, and then we are relying on some common sense for people using it. So if you're in a household gathering, clearly you don't need your seat 1.5 metre away because you're going to go out of that restaurant and then spend the rest of the time in the house. So the COVID safety plans are prompts for business to actually think through the risks, and I think we've done a lot of education about the community to advise them about the behaviours that support them to go about their business in a COVID-safe way.
Minister Constance, it just sounds like if everybody comes back to work in the city next year, that there's really no capacity on the network to make everybody COVID safe. Is that right?
No, I think the community's done an amazing job in responding to the requests we've made of them in relation to transport so far, and I think that'll continue. I think we've been kind in our messaging, and I think people have responded. And ultimately, as we do see, we're at 1.3 million of what we'd normally carry in terms of 2.3 to 2.4 million at the moment. But people have retimed their day. They're staggering their work hours. They are driving a bit more. Their cycling has gone through the roof. Ultimately, the community's responded. And I'd say, particularly as we head into 2021, we want to maintain the discipline of the green dots. We want people to use the technology to make sure that they can get the best information possible to be safe. To Brad's point, we want people wearing masks. There's not enough people doing it. I am pleading with the community to do it because it's one of 4 key measures that we've implemented and maintained consistently this year in relation to transport, and that is maintain physical distancing, keep apart, make sure you practice good hand hygiene, and in relation to that, we've had 1.5 million hours of additional cleaning on every train and bus and ferry and light rail service. And then at the same time, please put the mask on because it's your best chance. So we do that, and then we can keep the community safe and keep each other safe. And I have very significant confidence in the community in the way in which they've responded thus far, and I think that will continue.
Just to ask for you quickly, did your office attempt to suppress a story in The Australian about your failure to self-isolate following a COVID test last week before it was published?
Oh, look, there were a number of things put to my office which simply weren't true, and obviously we refuted whatever wasn't true. And I say this again yesterday, what I take out from yesterday and last week Budget Day is that none of us, whether it's myself or anybody else, can afford to be complacent, and I accept that I should have absolutely followed the guidelines, but I also accept that it's so easy for any of us to be complacent, to not manage the 1.5 metre distance rule, to not make sure we don't touch people. It's really hard this time of year. And I just say to everybody, take my example as one where all of us do have to stick to the rules to keep us on the path we've been on. So,
Premier, did you know about the messages that were sent from your media advisors to Yoni Deshan at The Australian regarding his attempt to suppress the story about you not self-isolating?
as I said, we refuted things that weren't correct, but there's no taking away from the fact that I should have followed the guidelines, and I accept that. But I also say to the people of New South Wales, can all of us, as we're easing restrictions, can all of us please not be complacent? It's really difficult because I notice when I'm out in the community and people see me, they come out and want to touch you physically. And on some occasions we all do it without thinking. But it's really important, as the number of social gatherings increase, as we do come into contact with family and friends we may not have seen for a long time, it's so important for all of us to maintain that rigour that stood us in good stead. As we've eased restrictions in the home setting as well in particular, we know the risk of indoor spread is higher than outdoor spread. We are really relying on people's common sense and goodwill, but it's actually giving back to the community what we've received all year, which is unbelievable support in following the health advice. And following the health advice has meant New South Wales is in the position we are in. And I just ask everybody, including myself, including anyone, please don't be complacent. Whether you're in this room or elsewhere, 1.5 square metres has to be applied. Make sure you hand sanitise. Make sure if you're catching public transport, please wear a mask. We do want to see more people go back to work. We don't want to make it compulsory. We don't.
Is it a breach of social distancing to use your hands to touch somebody else?
Oh, look, and I accept that if people touch me and inadvertently you touch others. The guidelines say you should maintain 1.5 metres.
That
right?
happened during your interaction with Lee Evans? Has yet to change?
Oh, I couldn't remember who I touched and who I didn't touch, but
He says
Right.
seems to suggest
Well,
that's what happened.
that could have happened, and that's why I say it is so easy for any of us, to let our guard down. And to be honest, 1.5 metres should apply everywhere.
What you said yesterday, you maintain social distancing at all times while you were awaiting your test result. That may not be the case.
Well, look, I accept that. I accept that it's so easy for any of us, including myself, to let I'm far from perfect, and I wish I could say that on every single occasion that I've interacted with anybody, or any of us have. But how easy it is, especially when I'm out in public. I have people come up to me and I put the elbow out, but it's very difficult to make sure that all of us maintain that level of social distancing. I'm not pretending it's easy. I'm not pretending I'm perfect and I have a 100% success rate. I would love to see someone that can put up their hand and say they've had a 100% success rate. It's really hard.
People had a sense believe there's been money put into other suburban football grounds. Is this the case? Is that coming from the ANZ Stadium money, or is this other money?
Look, we, as you know, when the pandemic started, we evaluated what projects we felt should be different in New South Wales, and we did also adopt the general strategy that it was better to invest in a suburban stadium than it was to invest in ANZ, and those discussions with NRL and other sporting codes are ongoing, and we appreciate the strategy that, and COVID has taught us this, that people are looking more to their local communities, are looking more at local venues, and as a reflection of that, the New South Wales Government did indicate that we would prefer to invest, when it comes to future sporting infrastructure, to those local facilities as opposed to those broader ones. But I want to stress that our discussions with the NRL and other codes are ongoing, and we want to make sure that we provide the best outcome for the community.
Given very little money was committed to those suburban stadiums in the budget, have you reneged on your assurance or deal?
No, we've not reneged on anything, because what we are concerned to do is to make sure we get it right, to make sure we prioritise resources where they're needed most, and I really look forward to ongoing discussions with the NRL and other codes, and I think the public appreciates the challenges that we have and the opportunities that we have during this time, and we want to make sure any decisions we take are well considered, and I want to say very openly that those discussions are ongoing with the NRL, but we've also taken their advice. In fact, it was they that approached us to say to us they now saw less value in the ANZ facility being upgraded than the suburban stadiums being upgraded, and that's the policy we've in essence adopted, that we would, as a government, invest progressively, not all at once, but progressively in upgrading suburban stadia, as opposed to investing more taxpayer dollars in upgrading a larger stadium.
When they made a suggestion, wouldn't they prefer that 800 million then be diverted to the stadium?
But it's not a straight hypothecation like that. We have to make sure we do business cases for each of the suburban stadia, decide in what order things occur. So they're ongoing discussions, and we have to remember these are facilities for taxpayers across the state, and facilities which we hope, some of which will have a multi-purpose. So these are ongoing discussions, and can I say that it's healthy to have these discussions. I'm looking forward to them. And I want to commend organisations like the NRL who made the impossible happen. I would never have predicted we'd be able to have a full season and a grand final, and I think Mr V'landys and the NRL need to be congratulated for their courage, frankly. At a time when we were all not knowing where the pandemic would go, they stuck to their position and managed to pull off what we thought wouldn't be possible. So I want to congratulate them for that, but also stress that the government will continue to have an ongoing dialogue, and we look forward to making announcements in that regard publicly.
On the COVID restrictions, on the coronavirus,
So we'll go one there, yeah.
on the COVID restrictions, just in terms of what you've eased today, so venues up to 200 square metres can have 2 square metres with no cap. That means up to 100 people
Correct.
in a venue of 200 square metres. A 300 square metre venue can have 1 per 4, so 75 people. An 850 square metre corporate function centre can only have 300 people for a corporate event. Where's the logic in that?
Yeah, no, James, can I say you're absolutely right in highlighting those issues. But what we wanted to do is to make sure that we provided those smaller venues with immediate information and relief, because we are, from a health perspective, able to do that. The next step that we want to take in relation to the 2 square metre rule, we want to apply to the entire industry so there is consistency. And can I make that very clear? And can I say to the industry, you won't be having to wait weeks for us to be able to make that announcement. I will say it will depend on the health advice, but I'm hoping it will be very soon. But it will depend on the health advice. And the health advice to date has served us really well. And Dr. Chan, I know, won't mind me saying that because of the traces of the virus that we since identified in Western Sydney, which could very well be old cases in the Liverpool area, once that issue is sorted out, Dr. Chan will reconsider that advice. But the next step for us is to be able to apply the rule consistently across the entire sector. And we're concerned that if we manage things too incrementally, it doesn't allow the industry to adjust in time for Christmas and the New Year. So I want to make sure that everybody is very aware that hopefully the health advice will come back in a positive way in the very, very near future to be able to allow us to extend the 2 square metre rule to all venues across the hospitality sector. That is our hope, absolutely. That is our hope and our intention, and we hope that happens.
Deputy Premier, the renewable energy plan was pitched as a big job boost for the region. What do you make of the standoff happening in the upper house at the moment and a long list of amendments trying to block it?
Well, there isn't a standoff. The Liberal Party, the National Party, the Greens, the Labor Party, we're all on side. You know, Mark Latham has his democratic right to put up amendments and go through the democratic process of the House. And we as a government and the crossbench will debate those amendments, and that's what's occurring. And this is an important piece of legislation, and I said this to Matt Keane. I think what he has put forward with the total support of the coalition and all our partners is that for the first time in this debate about renewables, the future transitioning to renewables, we've got the template, we've got the plan. I think the state plan, the New South Wales plan, should be the plan that Australia adopts going forward. And for the regions, this is about investment in the jobs of the future. You know, yesterday I was in Narrabri, where we know the Santos gas project's been approved by the state and now the federal government. We're looking to investigate a special activation precinct so we can tap into that. And gas will be the key to transitioning to renewables in the future. And part of the energy plan and the renewable energy zones also includes investment in hydro, pumped hydro. So I think what we've done as a state is take the politics out of it. At what point, I think, in the last decade have we seen the Greens, the Labor Party, the National Party, the Liberal Party all on the same page when it comes to a plan to move to renewables and actually a plan to lower costs of energy for householders and businesses, and we've done that. Matt Keane should be given credit, the Cabinet should be given credit, the coalition working together should be given credit, and we've done that. And but as I say, Mark Latham, the shooters, the crossbench have every right to use their democratic process and the House. That is what the House, or the upper House, is about. It's the House of Review. They have that opportunity and they're using it.
Deputy Premier, on the regions, what I have you, there was a couple of hundred people gathered in Wellington last night concerned about the lack of doctors at the hospital there. Some days there's no doctors at all. Is it fair to call a hospital if there is no doctor on call? And is that a problem in regional New South Wales?
It's always been a problem in regional rural New South Wales. You know, I know in my own electorate, like at Bombala, it was the local government a number of years ago that put up a house to attract a doctor. These are the things that we do in the regions to attract all our health services. And you know, we have an issue around doctors, but that's not a state issue alone. We're going to have to work with our federal colleagues. We're going to have to work with how do we incentivise people to the regions. And I think off the back of COVID and the regions coming out of the back of bushfires and drought, there's this renaissance for the bush. I joked about this the other day that we had the Bush Summit by the Telly in Dubbo, and we've had the same down at Cooma. In a few years' time, we might have a Sydney Summit because the regions will be pumping and Sydney will be lagging. So, but we'll be working with, of course, the feds and everybody about making sure we have those services. But there is a place for telehealth. There is a place for innovation, and I think we've learned that through the COVID period as well.
Can I just ask someone had a Dr. Chan a question. Can I just give that first because it might be medical advice, health advice first, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, can I just get you to explain explicitly what the health advice is and your reasoning behind not easing restrictions to the 1 per 2 metres across the board? Can you explicitly say that?
So we know that hospitality, we've seen a number of transmission events at hospitality. They're indoor events. They're often associated with close mixing, even though we've got other controls in place, such as seated. We know that when we translate that across the state, those COVID-safe practices are not maintained at all times. So for that purpose, indoor environments, and particularly with the 1 per 2 square metres, does raise a risk. We want to see, I personally would like to be comforted by the sewage results for retesting over in Liverpool that's coming in over the weekend, and also I would love the community in southwestern Sydney to really come forward for testing. Those extra days of assurance that we're not missing unrecognised transmission in southwestern Sydney will give us great comfort.
But easing it for the smaller restrictions, that was an acceptable risk.
I think it's an acceptable risk, and I think, as the Premier's indicated, this is all about taking the community on a journey with us and managing risk. At no point in COVID is it risk-free, but we do have to balance keeping the community on side with us, as well as the economic benefits, which have health benefits as well. Let's be frank that unemployment is associated with health impacts.
Premier, what do you...
Sorry, Dr. Carnes, losing your voice a symptom of potential symptom of coronavirus?
There are many different symptoms. If you refer to our website, it gives you some advice, and if anyone's in doubt about whether they've got COVID symptoms, I suggest they seek clarification from their treating clinician.
Dr. Chubb, what's your thoughts about, you're the authority in this space, what's your thoughts about the Premier not isolating following?
Look, I think right from the get-go when I've been doing these press conferences, I've really not commented on individual cases, and I'm not going to change now. I think it's really important that the messages come across that at the moment we are asking everyone who has any symptoms, however minimal, particularly drawing attention to southwestern Sydney, to come forward for testing, and please do so. That will give us added assurance as we're easing the restrictions.
What are the consequences of not following your health advice if people just disregard the health advice?
So in relation to the advice and guidance we give around testing and the actions you should take following being tested, in the case of a positive case, or where you've been recognised as a close contact, or where we've advised you that you need to isolate because you've been at a venue of concern, where public health officials have contacted you, or your case, you've been diagnosed and public health has advised you of that, you are required to self-isolate, and if you fail to do so, you're subject to appropriate breach of the orders.
It's part of the reason people are required to self-isolate after a test, that they may have the virus even if they are asymptomatic.
So in general, just to clarify, we don't recommend asymptomatic testing generally. The reason for that is we know that has low yield and can divert us away from our positives. However, in some circumstances we do asymptomatic testing. We're using asymptomatic surveillance testing in some areas where there is considered high risk. So that would be, for instance, at our quarantine services for staff. And in those cases, we don't require people to self-isolate, because what we're doing that's almost our fourth level of assurance that we're not picking up transmission in those workers. In other cases, we do require you to self-isolate, and that's when we actually know that you've been to a contact. We ask you either whether you've got symptoms or not to get tested, and then to self-isolate for the 14 days because you've been identified as a close contact.
Premier, what are you going to do about the Greens amendment that are attached to the bill for ICAC funding?
Oh, look, can I just stress in relation to ICAC funding that in this year's budget we increased the recurrent expenditure for ICAC funding by in excess of 20%. And obviously we've also commissioned the Auditor-General to provide us that report about future funding models, and the government's considering that. In fact, the government urged the Auditor-General to do that piece of work, given a number of integrity agencies, including the Electoral Commission and others, had approached the government on that. In relation to the budget bills, we are confident of the New South Wales budget. We think what we put forward to the people of New South Wales is sound, but obviously we will consider that position in the lower house, as we are considering the energy bill amendments currently in the Parliament.
Premier, just on Queensland, if I could ask, you've welcomed the borders opening there. Two quick questions on that. Would you, given the Queensland Premier's trigger-happy stance to opening and shutting borders, would you as a traveller risk your money booking a holiday in Queensland right now? And secondly, what can you tell us about that phone call?
Firstly, can I say that I'm intending to stay in New South Wales over the summer. We have the best state in Australia, but I'm very relieved. You know, if I had close relatives and friends in another state, I'd be so relieved that I'd be able to spend Christmas together with them, whether they're coming here or going to Queensland. And I'm so relieved for our economy as well. Yesterday, to be honest, I was just so happy to get a phone call from her because I anticipated what it was about, and I was just thrilled for the people of our state, because it was a long time coming. I'm grateful that she made that decision. But I also do want to stress, to the point you're making, I don't think it's appropriate for us to consider opening and shutting borders part of a sustainable policy to manage COVID. I think we need to develop some confidence in our systems, and we also need to provide some confidence and certainty to individuals, families, and also businesses. Hopefully the airline sector will get a boost from those decisions, and that people who've either been hired or retained will be able to keep their jobs. And I think that is really important, because I do worry about what this means for mental health. I know just from speaking to people around the community that underlying the surface, everybody has been under unprecedented stress in terms of their own lifestyles and how things have been disrupted. So I hope that all state premiers consider leaving borders open as a sustainable policy during the pandemic, as opposed to opening and shutting those borders all the time.
While you were waiting your coronavirus test,
I'm sorry?
how long was the call?
It was short but cordial. Can I say it was short, constructive and cordial? And my honest, I was actually, I'm not, as you know, not an overly emotional person, but I did feel a level of emotion, because I knew that for so many families and loved ones, it would provide so much relief. So I was very excited and happy to receive the call, and happy that that decision has been made. And I urge her and other state leaders, and look, we cannot predict whether a situation like Victoria will ever happen again. We hope not. But certainly, in the absence of that unprecedented massive event, we should all, as state premiers, have confidence that our health experts, the broader community, has the capacity to act appropriately to clamp down on an outbreak, because we do know we're going to get cases. We do know that it's very difficult in a pandemic to sustain that level of zero community transmission, even though that's our aim. And we all also have to accept in New South Wales, we're still welcoming back 3,000 people every week, and we have noticed an increase in infections overseas. So our quarantine system, even though we welcome back 3,000 people a week, we do have more than 5,000 people in quarantine today, a number of whom have the virus, and that level of infection is increasing because we've seen in other places of the world that increase. So I'm not going to pretend that our quarantine system isn't under pressure, and that is always a risk. To date, we've managed that very well, but it's a daily battle. So I guess my message to the community is, whilst we're doing very well, we always have to manage the risk. As we ease restrictions, we have to manage the risk even more. None of us can afford any level of complacency, and that certainly applies to myself. And I also ask everybody to be extra careful, especially around older, more vulnerable loved ones, around the Christmas, New Year period. But my overwhelming feeling is one of relief for our citizens, that whether it's Victoria or Queensland, families will be, and I hope to goodness, because I know a lot of people are having that same angst about WA, I hope to goodness the WA Premier sees fit to do that ahead of Christmas as well.
James, last question. Whilst you're awaiting your coronavirus test, Premier, looking back, do you believe you adhered to the health guidelines when you had your first COVID test several months ago?
When I had my first COVID test, yes, I believe so.
Sorry,
Yeah, I believe so. It was quite a long time ago. I remember it was quite a few months ago, but yeah.
Just about this coronavirus test, Premier, whilst you were awaiting the result, you breached health guidelines by not self-isolating, by welcoming people into your office. You breached health guidelines by leaving your office and going into the chamber to vote. And you breached health guidelines and your own guidelines by coming into physical contact with Lee Evans and at least 3 others of your colleagues, and being within 1.5 metres distance from them. Did you breach any other health guidelines?
Look, I think I've admitted that I should have done things vastly differently, irrespective of the circumstances, irrespective of what occurred that day, and I take that lesson forward. I'm far from perfect, but I think what it highlights is I'm normally a very cautious person. If you come to my office, if you deal with me, you will know that, but it goes to show that no matter how you might interpret your response to COVID, that complacency is easy, it creeps in, and I can't allow that to happen where I'm concerned. And I do regard myself, can I say, as a high-risk person, because I come into contact with a lot of people I don't know, which is why I always go the extra length. And I do ask everybody to please think about that. I certainly have learned a valuable lesson moving forward, notwithstanding how I normally act, that it's very easy under certain circumstances to forget or to become complacent, and we can't afford that at any stage. I accept that. And moving forward, can I say that all of us, including myself, have to be extra vigilant, especially around people we're familiar with. And it's very difficult. I've been in situations where people burst into tears in front of you when you're talking to them, and it's really hard not to touch and not to do these things, but we all have to, and I accept that. But I also accept having that 100% perfection is difficult. I don't ever accept to be 100% perfect. I'm far from it. But all of us have to be extra COVID safe, and that is really what I'm urging people to do. And that's why today some of the restrictions we've eased are very much in good faith. That common sense approach to not having more than 30 indoors is a leap of faith on our part, but we feel the community deserves this, given the year we've had and given the response we've had from the community. Every time we've asked a particular location to go get tested, every time we've asked people to self-isolate, every time we've asked people to undertake sacrifices for the broader safety of everybody, that's occurred. And we just ask people to continue that, not to let down your guard, and just to make sure that we continue the great path that we're on. Thanks, everyone.
Premier, this isn't about being perfect or not perfect. This is about following a simple rule that everybody else seems to follow. Why couldn't you follow that simple rule?
Look, as I said, in hindsight, I should have done things very differently, and I should have, I was extra cautious in taking the test, but that doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. Once you decide to take a test, the guidelines are very clear. As I said yesterday, I took the test through an overabundance of caution, even though the only issue I had was losing my voice. However, notwithstanding that, the guidelines are clear. Once you take the test, you need to self-isolate until you get the result. And I accept that completely, irrespective of the circumstances, irrespective of what was there. And I accept that completely, and I take that lesson forward and let my example be a lesson to everybody about how easy it is to slip up, how easy it is to let your guard down. I certainly will work really, really hard not to ever let that happen again, especially when you come into contact with people you're familiar with, especially over summer where the social gatherings are, and especially when you're in circumstances which are really difficult. I think that is really the lesson for myself and for everybody, that complacency is our biggest risk. Complacency is the biggest risk to the future of our state and all of our well-being, and we need to make sure we're vigilant against it, including myself, and I accept that completely. And I've been working night and day to make sure we keep the community safe, as has everybody else. And I more than anybody know the risks involved, and that's why it's really important for me to take that lesson forward. And I encourage the whole of the state to please continue the path you're on, because as Dr. Chan and Brad Hazard even mentioned this morning, and we also have to remember the Crossroads case. That was, I don't want to put pressure on that person, but one person going to a large venue resulted in us having to deal with that cluster of cases for about 4 months, and that was from one person. So the risks are there. We can't forget that, and just because we've had successive days of zero community transmission doesn't reduce the impact of how virulent, how contagious and how deadly the virus is. And again, the biggest risk to all of us is complacency, and please, including myself, and it's really hard sometimes, and I know how hard it is when I'm out and about and people approach you and talk to you, or even if you're with someone familiar, we have to maintain that degree of vigilance to keep New South Wales where we are. Thanks.
Deputy Premier, do you apologise to the 3.3 million people who did do the right thing because you asked them to, and who have lost wages and work because of it?
Oh look, absolutely, and I said that. Absolutely. I deeply regret that I didn't do what I should have done, even though I explained the circumstances of why I took the test, even though it wasn't a recognised symptom. Any time you decide to take the test, right, irrespective of whether you're a high-risk person, asymptomatic, or whatever the circumstances, every time you decide to take the test, you must self-isolate until that you get the result. I accept that. I want to thank everybody for maintaining their vigilance in coming forward. And I please urge everybody not to allow complacency creep in, no matter who you are or what your circumstances or how familiar you are with someone. All of us, including myself, have been working hard to make New South Wales the safe place that it is, and we don't want to jeopardise that moving forward because of being complacent.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.